December 16, 1944. Early morning, Mona, Germany. The frozen ground shook as yet another salvo of American artillery shrieked over the horizon. But something was different this morning. Horrifically, unthinkably different. The shells weren't bursting on the ground or against the trees. They were exploding in midair, right over the advancing Germans, showering down a deadly rain of steel splinters that no foxhole could hope to shield against. Among the 326th Volk Grenadier Division, attacking the 38th Cavalry soldiers who had endured years on the Eastern Front found themselves facing something outside of their experience of warfare. These weren't the artillery patterns they were used to, the predictable effects, the secure zones, the protective benefits of this was death from above, dispensed with mathematical accuracy. At the time, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had just made one of the most momentous unauthorized acts of the Battle of the Bulge. In violation of standing orders without authority from above, he had instructed his gunners to fire shells containing the Allies' best-kept secret, proximity fuses. These rounds, with miniature radar sets inside them that could sense their distance from targets and explode at the best height, would increase artillery killing, powered by a factor of 50. The math of death was about to be redone in the frozen woods of the Ardennes. What the German troops could not know was that they had just engaged an instrument so novel that it would revolutionize not only this battle, but the face of warfare itself. The storm was unleashed. Operation Watch in the Rhine had started with fantastic promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's Finalgambel centered on 200,000 German troops, 1,000 tanks, and almost 2,000 guns, all disguised from view through the dropped Ardennes. The Führer had promised his commanders that this attack would divide the Allied forces and retake Antwerp, sink the tide of a war that was sliding inexorably toward loss. The opening bombardment at 0530 hours and December 16th had gained total tactical surprise. German artillery was blazing at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85 meters front. American intelligence had collapsed miserably. They hadn't picked up the enormous concentration, and much frontline machinery was either green replacements or battle-weary veterans sent to this quiet sector for a rest. But at Monshaw, Colonel Axelson was confronted with an impossible tactical problem. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, which was Tinarican SN's unit, was being overpowered by larger German forces. Normal artillery could not stem the attack. Desperate Axelson made his historic choice. Use the unauthorized secret proximity-fuzed shells. He would later risk court-martial for this decision, but at the time he knew that to obey orders would mean defeat. The impact was instant and overwhelming. German troops moving in traditional assault waves suddenly discovered themselves under a sort of fire they had not experienced before. The shells burst 30 to 50 feet above, each blast producing a cone of fragments that blanketed much greater area than regular ground-burst shells. Veterans who were experienced in getting under cover from normal artillery were killed in their foxholes, behind trees, in ditches, anywhere they tried to get cover. The secret science of death. The proximity fuses symbolized the synthesis of U.S. scientific ingenuity and manufacturing capability at their peak. In contrast to traditional shells, which needed direct hit or time fuses that usually exploded prematurely, the proximity fuse carried a self-contained radar system no bigger than a can of coffee. Within every fuse, American engineers had jammed 130 electronic elements, comprising 4 or 5 tiny vacuum tubes, depending on the type, that could stand the awesome 20,000 times gravity force off bung shot from an artillery cannon. The physics were astounding. On firing, the acceleration would shatter a glass ampule holding electrolyte to form a battery that powered the tiny radar during the flight of the shell. Dr. Merle Tuve at Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with Manhattan Project-level intensity. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak production. Security matched that of the atomic bomb program. Workers couldn't discuss their work, even with families, and each fuse carried a unique serial number for tracking. The technical challenge had appeared to be insurmountable. Living room radios, vacuum tubes, were totally re-engineered to endure being fired from guns. They needed to operate while revolving at enormous rotational velocities, perform under every weather condition, and be sensitive enough to identify targets without dropping too early. The solution emerged through miniaturization practices that would eventually transform the electronics sector. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no bigger than pencil erasers but carried all the components of traditional radio tubes, American factories were making 40,000 proximity fuses a day by December 1944. More than 100 firms assisted in the endeavor, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crossley Corporation. The cost of the program was $1 billion in dollars during the 1940s, second only to the Manhattan Project in war expenditures. Authorization, crisis, and expansion. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16 caused an instant command crisis. He had disobeyed explicit orders limiting the use of proximity fuses to anti-aircraft, lest captured specimens be reverse-engineered by the Germans. But Mona's horrific efficiency was undeniable. The German offensive had been brought cold, with casualties shocking both sides. Supreme Headquarters learned of the weapon's effect quickly. General Eisenhower saw the desperatization unfolding throughout the Ardennes, officially requested permission on December 19. By the 21st of December, our restrictions had been removed and proximity fuses were made available for general ground combat throughout the Bulge battlefield. The subsequent rapid distribution proved American logistical excellence. In just a few days, proximity-fused shells were being shipped to artillery units throughout the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their location as the German ring encircled the town. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, using their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, started using them to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American battalion led by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, utilized them with devastating effect southwest of Bastogne. Each battalion found the same truth. Proximity fuses turned artillery from a support weapon into a decisive fiftyfold weapon. Forward observers were no longer required to meticulously read datum fire. Fuses would determine their own best point of detonation. Accuracy demands lessened as lethality rose exponentially. Bastogne encircled but superior. The siege of Bastogne gave excellent proof of the value of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, fully encircled and outnumbered, defended the critical crossroads against successive German attacks. Their artillery support consisted of the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion that was armed with 75 MPA howitzers with proximity-fused shells. From December 19 through December 31, the 463rd put exactly 7,676 rounds on target by official unit records. Although not all could be proximity fused because of supply shortage, those that were had humbling psychological and physical impact. German assault formations literally disintegrated in the face of the airburst barges, with whole platoon destroyed in seconds. The December 2-2 ended after General McAuliffe's historic nuts response to the German surrender ultimatum demonstrated the weapons. German troops moving forward over snowfields in conventional formans were exposed in the open. The proximity-fused shells exploded above them with perfect timing, generating overlapping patterns of destruction with no place to hide. The Alafricanamian 969th Artillery Battalion also played an equally vital role. Their 155 mm howitzers encircled Baston's perimeter with a ring of death that German forces proved impenetrable. The big shells exploding at 50 flayed down even wider areas of lethal fragments. German captives afterwards reported that units attacking frequently disintegrated before they even came within American lines, with troops running away from incomprehensible airbursts. The Sauer River slaughter, the best documented ever display of proximity fusel lethality, is likely to have been at the Sauer River in front of Ardennes on December 25 to 26. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was advancing north to relieve Bastogne, saw this action personally and documented it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion, trying to cross the partially frozen river, thought they were beyond observation from Americans in the darkness and fog. Conventional artillery would have taken meticulous fire adjustment, providing the Germans time to complete their crossing or seek cover. But proximity-fused shells needed no such adjustment. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702 killed by actual count, accounts for one of the accurately recorded casualty totals from the use of proximity fuses. The mathematical effectiveness was chilling. One battalion effectively no longer existed within minutes, with no hope of escape or defense. The psychological effects extended throughout German formations in the region, with troops disobeying commands to make river crossings. Woodland warfare evolved. The Ardennes thick forests, which Germans relied upon for cover, turned into death traps when proximity fuses were added to the mix. In open country, a 32-50 feet proximity fuse was lethal, but in woods, the effects were compounded exponentially. The airbursts splintered tree limbs, sending thousands more pieces of wood flying. These splinters, up to a man's arm in length, flew at hundreds of feet per second with deadly impact. Traditional defensive positions, sheltering behind large trees, digging foxholes under root systems, became obsolete. The fragments and splinters came from above, obliterating centuries of tactical experience regarding forest fighting. American artillery units soon became aware of this multiplier effect. One proximity-fuzed 155 mm shell exploding above the forest canopy could remove an area the size of a tennis court of all life. The use of metal fragments from splintering of the wooden trees, and the shell created a 360 kill zone no level of tactical competence could avoid. German forest warfare specialists saw their knowledge rendered useless. The dispersal to minimize concentrated casualties placed units in danger of the wide area effect. Clustering for mutual support resulted in entire squadrons being killed by one shell. There was no appropriate tactical response to this new threat. Technological superiority in action. The proximity fuse was based on principles that sounded like science fiction to 1940s troops. Every fuse had a small radio transmitter working at 180 to 220 MHz, emitting waves all the time that bounced off things, ground, trees, cars, human bodies. When the shell closed in on its target, the reflected signal grew stronger. When it reached predetermined intensity corresponding to maximum burst height, electronic switch triggered detonation. The whole system had to operate in conditions that would incapacitate regular electronics. Firing acceleration was as high as 20,000 Earth gravities, enough to squash a human body to microscopic thinness. The shells rotated at speeds that generated enormous centrifugal forces. Temperatures varied from gun barrel temperature of 3000 F2 sub-zero temperatures at trajectory apex, but the fragile vacuum tubes, shielded by creative cushioning systems, remained inoperated. With more than 80% reliability, the best burst heights were established. Through rigorous testing at Ardennes proving ground for one, the norm divisional gun 30 feet worked perfectly. The 155 mm guns were maximally lethal at 50 feet. The few available 240 mm shells produced catastrophic effects at 70+ FT, capable of eliminating whole grid squares off enemy troops. This technological advantage directly manifested as battlefield dominance. Studies showed proximity fuses increased lethality by 5 to 10 times over conventional shells. The lethal fragment area increased by a factor of 50, and applications showed even more dramatic improvements. Shooting down V1 flying bombs improved from 17% to 79% success rate within week of proximity fuse deployment. Intelligence failures and German confusion. The German intelligence fail regarding proximity fuses proved catastrophic. In December 1944, Wehrmacht troops overwhelmed an American depot of ammunition, capturing around 20,000 proximity fuses. This windfall of information should have resulted in immediate countermeasures. German technical experts instead went through the captured fuses and pronounced them impossible. Vacuum tubes in an artillery shell defied everything German engineers held to be true regarding electronics and ballistics. They concluded that Americans were employing some type of magnetic detection, or that the observable elements were decoys concealing the true mechanism. This failure was partially due to institutional blindness. Germany had indeed pioneered proximity fuse development prior to the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had functional prototypes in 1940. Hitler's directive canceling all weapons projects taking over 6 months to completion had ended the program. German engineers couldn't believe Americans had cracked probables they themselves had abandoned. The irony deepened when considering German technical capabilities. Their electrostatic proximity fuses showed 95% reliability in tests. Using electrical capacitance changes rather than radar, had development continued, Germany might have fielded proximity fuses by 1941. Hermann Göring would later admit during interrogation that German fuses were 3 or 4 months from production when the Christmas catastrophe, December 25, 1944, brought no halt. German forces trying to utilize Christmas for supply and reorganization found that proximity fuses accepted no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly points fell under ruinous bombardment that needed no forward observers. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone expended more than 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day. The majority proximity-fused. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers provided quick, accurate fire that caught German forces totally unprepared. The ability to shoot effectively without being seen in bad weather at night turned artillery into a 24-hour terror from a daylight weapon. The psychological effect was drastic. German troops had learned to march under bad weather when Allied aircraft were unable to fly and observers could not see them. Proximity fuses took away this refuge. Death could strike at any time in any weather, with no notice except for the short whistle of incoming shells. Malmedy and Skorzeny's elite. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny's crack commandos tried to capture Malmedy. These were not average soldiers, but hand-picked troops who had rescued Mussolini. Come close to capturing Tito, and infiltrated American lines dressed in U.S. uniforms. They were the best Germany could put out. They encountered annihilating proximity-fuzed artillery fire that converted their American camouflage from battle tactic to death cloaks. The shells exploded overhead with uncanny precision, as if they could detect the imposters below. While exact casualty figures remained disputed, the attack failed catastrophically with heavy losses that ended Skorzeny's offensive operations. The psychological breakdown among elite SS troops proved particularly significant. These soldiers, indoctrinated with beliefs in German superiority and trained to theist standards, found themselves helpless against American technology. Some survivors reportedly charged straight into American lines, rather than risk further shelling. A total collapse of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical warriors. Industrial achievement. The manufacturing miracle behind proximity fuses equaled any wartime industrial feat. More than one American companies had switched to fuse manufacture by December 1944. Crossley Corporation left refrigerator production to the assembly of fuses. Emerson Radio reloaded from home electronics to weapons manufacture. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric committed entire facilities to the program. Quality control was better than anything ever tried before in mass production. Each of the 130 parts was individually tested. Every soldered joint was magnified for examination. Random samples were literally for to test survivability in combat conditions. The rejection rate was merciless. Any part that deviated slightly was rejected. The female workforce held the precision together while putting in 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. They couldn't know what they were making due to security They only knew it was vital to the warfare. By December 1944, they were producing one proximity fuse every 2 seconds around the clock. The cost reduction achieved was remarkable. In 1942, each fuse cost $732, more than a worker's annual salary. By December 1944, mass production had driven costs to $18 per unit while quality. This effectiveness produced 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 used during the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's math. General Patton appreciated proximity fuses' value more than any commander may have. His Third Army, advancing to relieve Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery chief, Brigadier General Edward Williams, created new tactics specifically for the use of proximity fuses. Williams was the first to use in-target concentration with proximity fuses. Several battalions fired together, so shells reached together. When scores of proximity-fuzed shells exploded all at once at maximum height, it was apocalyptic. German troops referred to it as the bell toll of doom. In the period between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity-fuzed rounds. The effect was decisive in shattering German resistance and opening up the corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. Elsenborn Ridge holds the Battle of Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum. Here the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division, Liebstandarte, Adolf Hitler, over 3 days, December 17th to 19th. American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, with approximately 40,000 being proximity combined. These 25% of the shells killed an estimated 60% of the 5,0+ German casualties. The arithmetic was irrefutable. Proximity fuses increased American firepower for the German charges hurled time and again up the forest-covered steep slopes into walls of airburst steel. Whole companies vanished in seconds. bodies stacked so thick that later waves had to gleam over their own dead. After 3 days, the attacks stopped. Fiftyfold SS elite had been shattered by American technology. Operation Boden, Platter's destruction. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte. 900 fighters on Allied airfields. The surprise was total, catching numerous Allied planes on the ground. But returning German pilots encountered walls of proximity-fuzed anti-aircraft fire. Of 277 German planes lost that day, 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, most employing proximity fuses. The kill ratio astounded sides. German pilots trained to avoid predictive anti-aircraft fire found shells bursting exactly where they would do the most damage. The Luftwaffe, already weak, never recovered from these losses. Breaking the secret, by early January 1945, secrecy had become impossible. Too many shells had been fired. Too many soldiers had seen their effects. On January 6, the War Department authorized a disallowed disclosure. The New York Times published the story of a new form of artillery shell that enhances the power of American guns without disclosing the technology. German intelligence did not initially understand the weapon's importance. A Foreign Armies West report, dated January 10, said the Americans have a radio-controlled artillery fuse which explodes shells at ideal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has created heavy losses among our troops in the Ardennes. There are no countermeasures available. Strategic impact evaluation. Post-war studies showed proximity-fuzed's decisive influence. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt declared, "The proximity-fuzed was decisive. Our assaults collapsed, not due to American bravery, although they fought, but due to artillery that appeared to have eyes." General Eisenhower, 5th Panzer Army commander, testified, "The American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in the air. They caused panic even among veteran troops." The statistics tell the story. 200,000 proximity-fuzed shells fired, accounting for an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total German. The weapon achieved 5 to 10 times greater effectiveness than conventional ammunition, while requiring no advanced observation in adverse weather. The human toll? Behind each statistic was human tragedy. German troops, most of them teenage draftees in the last stages of theater, were killed in ways conventional warfare had never considered. They were killed by weapons that appeared to have a kind of intelligence that could locate them no matter where others sought to hide. American factory workers paid their own price. Factory accidents were covered up for security. Employees at Crossley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other plants broke down under the strain of stress and fatigue. They manufactured weapons of a lethality never before seen with no idea what they were making. Bearing that secret enforced silence. But war's moral arithmetic is never clean-cut. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American lives. Without proximity fuses, how many more would have died? For how much longer would the war have continued? How many additional Holocaust victims would have died battles? With each day that the war was shortened, potentially thousands in concentration camps were saved from liberation. Technological heritage. The development of the proximity fuse program yielded innovations that rebuilt post-war technology. The vacuum tubes miniaturized found their way into the bases of modern electronics. Quality control methods developed for making fuses became industry. The organizational techniques managing hundreds of suppliers set the stage for contemporary supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen used his miniaturization skills totally on satellite instrumentation. Subsequently, he found Earth's radiation belts. The principles of radar developed into contemporary systems. The autonomous sensors making decisions idea became Thebosis for guided missiles and ultimately all smart weapons. Each precision-guided munition in use today evolved from the proximity fuse, the initial weapon to be able to sense its surrounding and decide when to explode. The revolution initiated in the Ardennes marches on contemporary battlefields where intelligent weapons are the bane of warfare. Final reconning. The Battle of the Bulge concluded January 25, 1945, with the German forces in full. Hitler's final offensive had left Germany about 100,000 casualties for nothing. American casualties amounted to 75,000, including 19,000 fatalities. The proximity fuse had established itself not only as a weapon, but as a war winner. General Eisenhower's view that German control of proximity fuses could have rendered D-Day extremely difficult, perhaps impossible, highlights their strategic significance. They were not simply an improvement in artillery, but a revolutionary technology which fundamentally altered the mathematics of warfare. The German troops who encountered proximity-fused artillery saw something new. Death brought about by shells that seemed cleaver, that could reach them anywhere, that turned the very air itself into a zone of killing. Their experience defined the changing of warfare to the technological era. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized initial use on December 16, 1944, to the systematic use of 200,000 shells along the Ardennes, proximity fuses proved that scientific advancement could be the key to ultimate military superiority. The coming together of American industrial might, scientific brilliance, and tactical innovation produced a weapon that decided the outcome of the war. The story of the proximity fuse is, in the end, one of transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It demonstrated that industrial democracy could create weapons of ruinous effectiveness, that innovation could transcend numbers, that the side with better science would win. These lessons did not just inform World War II's remnant, but the overall architecture of war that succeeded. In the frozen woods of Ardennes, technological warfare fully came of age. The arithmetic of killing was redescribed by small radar sets and artillery rounds, irrevocably changing the way that humans fight wars. The German soldiers killed by proximity-fuzed airbursts were victims not only of a specific battle, but of a military revolution ongoing that continues to shape our world today.